Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ask One.
I'm sorry, is it not interpretive dance? Am I in the wrong room?
Oh yeah, no, that's next door. That's Studio B. Is there really a God? Another one of those burning issues that we get so many, people ask us so many times, from atheists, skeptics, even Christians who struggle to speak to their friends about this. So on my left...
Say my name, say my
TJ.
name.
You woohoo!
We'll put in some effects, right, when we're editing this. Anyway, TJ.
The
And
Right
on my
Reverend.
left is
Felony.
Woohoo!
Yeah! And that would be appropriate time for me to say, I'm Melanie.
Awesome.
Lemony.
Felemony. Hey.
And I'm Heinz.
Hey,
Oh.
Heinz.
Yes.
He's the interpretive dancer.
Yes. I do the jingles.
That's beautiful.
It's
The
beautiful.
singer.
I know.
Really good at that.
It's what I came to work for.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it adds a lot. We thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
So welcome, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
are you as amped about this as I am?
Completely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Did you say who you are?
Who
I
are
am
you?
The
Who
host.
are you?
But what is your
I'm
name?
the host with the most.
The most what exactly?
The host with the
That's the
most
issue.
what is the question.
Also, can we acknowledge our sun god?
I was
Yeah,
just about to suggest.
Tootsie,
Tootsie,
yeah, between
hey.
us, he's the guy making sure that we all sound great.
And what is your name?
It's Donnie Chang.
Okay, cool.
Probably recognize me from the posters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, it's great to be here with you guys. So yeah, today's topic is there really a God? And I just, those of you who are listening out there, these questions come in through our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/ask1. And again, we just want to encourage you, please, to write into us, ask us your questions so that we can get into this with you. Whether you're a skeptic, you're a non-believer, you're a Christian who is maybe struggling with some sort of issue with Christianity, please write into us. We want to be able to deal with this topic and just, shed some light.
Yeah.
So maybe a good place to start is for each one of you, how would you address this issue? If one of your friends, believer, skeptic, or non-believer, came up to you and said, "Prove to me that there is a God."
I was always told, and it's the cheesiest thing, I actually said it before we started recording. Someone said to me once that you can feel the wind, but you can't see it. So this whole thing of you can't see God, but you can feel his effect kind of thing, which is not the reason why I believe God exists. It's the reason why I was told once upon a time. And I think as a child, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that makes total sense. But I struggle to believe that this whole universe and this earth and the fact that we have all of these creatures and human beings all came about by accident. That we have water covering this earth that sustains the life of all of these creatures and plants, and that happened by accident. And the fact that the earth is positioned in such a way that gravity is perfect and it happened by accident.
Yeah.
That for me is like, okay, well, someone must have thought this thing through.
Yeah.
And
I'm very glad that you said that, because that's actually sort of, for me, jumping straight into the deep end of this conversation. Because there is an actual philosophical and scientific discussion around that called the fine-tuning of the universe, where if anything in the universe was out by even the smallest hair's breadth, life in the universe would be impossible.
Yeah.
And this is information that's out there from very reliable sources, like reputable scientists and philosophers who are discussing these issues, where it's not just a case of, oh, well, human beings and carbon-based life forms wouldn't be able to exist, nothing would exist.
Yeah.
There'd be no stars, there'd be no physics, there'd be nothing. Life would just not be possible in this universe. And it's on such a fine razor's edge. And I mean, that for me is a very compelling argument.
An argument for the existence of God. See, I watched a debate very recently, and you know, the guy who was talking about, he was basically saying God doesn't exist, and he made a very interesting point, which would be interesting to put on the table here, which is his basic premise was to say, why is it that those who believe in God, for anything that we don't understand as humanity, we default to mystifying? So if we don't understand why something is the way it is, our first thing, because we don't understand, because it's bigger than us, our first sort of response as humanity is to go back and say, there must be a God. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but that kind of struck me as very interesting. Like we mystify everything that we don't understand. Is that what's happening when we talk about the existence of God? Are we just creating a name for
That sounds like
for
Neil
what we
deGrasse
don't
Tyson,
understand?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who am I like, by the way? But
Yeah.
I think it's certainly it's probably a valid point to make, because a lot of the history of religion is rooted in, you know, oh, we can't explain this or that natural phenomena, and now we attribute it to some God. But I think what makes faith in Jesus and faith in the Christian God quite different is that it's rooted in reality and in the world around us and in science and observable fact. It's so when you asked earlier, why are you a Christian? Why do you believe that God exists? And to me personally, it's probably a cumulative case. Like, there are many reasons why I believe in God. You know, one of them is what you just mentioned, the anthropic principle, the idea that, you know, this world is fine-tuned to a very, very high degree. And I mean, that certainly is rooted in, you know, in a scientific principle, right? So it's not a wishy-washy, airy-fairy kind of, oh, we don't understand this, so God must have done it. As a matter of fact, as our knowledge of the universe and of physics has increased, the idea that, hold on a second, there's something very special about all this that makes the argument for God's existence quite
compelling,
you know, probable has only grown. But going beyond that, to me personally, yes, that's one of the reasons why I believe that God exists, and there are many other reasons why I think it's logical and good to believe that God exists. But to me, the prime reason I believe that God exists is because there's one inescapable fact of history that I cannot go around, and that is the life and death and resurrection of Jesus 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, there was a man who said he was God, who lived on this earth, who died, and who rose again. And those three things are all established facts of history. And if you're a history buff, you can go and read up about them. If you want to go and read about the validity and the veracity of the proof around the resurrection of Jesus, for example, you can go and read about it. So it's not, as Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, oh, we don't understand this, therefore we believe in God. It's the exact opposite. Is we understand this better now, therefore it's becoming rationally, it's just more and more compelling to believe that there is a point behind this, that there is that God exists. I mean, that to me personally, that's.
I want to go back to what Melanie has, said at the beginning, that if you just look around you and look at the beauty that's around you, and apart from that is just look at yourself. You've been created by God and He loves you unconditionally. But then at the same time, I think why people are asking the question is because as much as there's a lot of beauty going around you, there's also things that are not so beautiful, and there's a lot of negativity going on, and then where's God in that? And
how can a God that apparently loves us allow all of this, all the misery that happens in the world? How can He allow that? Which is also a very, very valid point. But people don't understand that this is all our own creating. The misery and the state that the world is in isn't God's fault. You know, we've chased him out of our schools, we've chased him out of our legal system, we've chased him out of our every institution that he should be the center point of. And then when everything falls apart, we've got the nerve to say, well, where's God? How can a loving God do that? He's exactly where we put him. Over there somewhere, and now we want to blame him when everything's gone sideways. But yeah, I think it is a very valid question for somebody to ask who's not aware of God.
Yeah.
And I know we don't want to say too much about the problem of evil because we're going to dig into that in one of our future episodes.
Yeah.
But also, as you were talking now, I'm thinking of the fact that the reason we believe in God, in the Christian God, is because we are saying He wants to draw us into a relationship with Him, and often it's the evil, it's the suffering, it's the hardship that draws us into relationship with Him, and that's actually also an objectively verifiable fact. I mean, when you look at the world today, and you look at where people believe in God, it's often the places where suffering, pain, hardship is an everyday fact of life. And God often uses that to draw people into relationship with Him. So to me, what I'm trying to say is often that argument about the problem of evil, that's as much a proof for the existence of God.
So then, I mean, a sort of a counter argument to that would be then, does God orchestrate evil to get people to come to Him? I've heard that before. It's actually one of our questions around this that came in on the Facebook page.
Which country again?
That's another one from Ethiopia. We get a lot of stuff from Ethiopia.
That's cool.
It's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah. So thank you, all of you who are listening to us in Ethiopia. Please keep sending your questions in.
Yeah.
On facebook.com/ask1.
Great.
That's cool.
But getting back to so God orchestrates evil to make people come to Him.
I don't think he orchestrates evil. I wouldn't put it that way. I would say that He directs history and He directs events to bring us into relationship with Him. I mean, that cuts to the heart of the whole problem of evil, and I don't think we should be spending too much time deep diving into that, because we want to do that in a future episode. But I think for myself, suffice to say, is I believe that God's hand is supreme. That He has everything under control, and that ultimately He works things out in a way that draws us to Him. We don't always understand how that works.
Yeah. I think also, to put it in a very simple way, it doesn't mean that if Jesus is standing there with His arms open ready for you, it doesn't mean that He created all the hardship that you went through to walk into those open arms. It's just unfortunate that people would wait until that moment to walk into His arms.
Yeah. It says more about human nature than it does about God's nature.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
I quite like the fact that, Heinz, in your kind of commentary just now, you talked about the Christian God, and Felony, you've just talked about Jesus Christ, because that for me introduces another interesting dimension to the conversation. We're talking about, does God exist, or is there a God? But there are many people that believe that there is a God, but just not this defined Christian God, you know, in various, there are various definitions or kind of explanations in various cultures. I know here in our own continent, people will refuse the Christian God in many countries as sort of a colonialist idea. So even that very idea, maybe getting past somebody who believes there is no God, what then do we say to those who say, yeah, there is a God, but just not this God that you're trying to force down my throat, as it were? I mean, people even say, we are gods. We are gods in and of ourselves. We are gods. What would we say to folks? Because that's a very
super important question, right? Because we don't believe in Thor or Ra, or we actually believe in Jesus. We believe in a very our conception of God is very, very specific. And it's important to realize that even when we talk about the arguments for the existence of God, there's a certain point at which you need to go from general to specific.
Yeah.
Because there are many, as I said earlier, there are many arguments that I love for the existence of God that are quite compelling arguments. We were, just before we started this recording, we talked about one of those arguments, the Kalam cosmological arguments that says it's a purely logical argument that says everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now that's a very general statement, and that statement could lead you anywhere, right? It leaves you with an idea of some kind of a supreme being or intelligence. But at some point you need to go, yes, all those philosophical arguments are wonderful, they're awesome, but ultimately I now need to go, okay, well, what can I see? How has that God revealed himself to us?
Yeah.
And he did so in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That is the touching point. That's where it all starts.
I agree 100%. But often, if you're dealing with somebody who is, say, a staunch atheist, jumping straight to the Jesus issue is such a, you asking them to make such a huge leap from their current worldview. I find that all of these, like you were saying, the ontological arguments and the cosmological arguments and all of those things is a great way to get somebody who's doesn't believe in anything to at least start considering the possibility that there is a higher being. And once you get past that barrier, you can start introducing Jesus, which, and like you said, there's just as much empirical evidence that Jesus existed and he lived the life that the Bible says he lived. But to ask a devout atheist to make that leap is often very, very difficult. I don't know if you guys have experienced the same thing.
We would want to say something, but just bear in mind that we do have an episode coming up soon where we talk specifically about that. Is Jesus the only God?
Great.
So yeah, our listeners can stay tuned.
Okay, so maybe we should be then sort of discussing is the probability of there being a God, like a timeless, limitless, all-powerful, personal, loving creator out there. Is it like, if you're listening to this show, is it possible for you to consider that as a possibility?
Yeah, I think it's been one of those things that humanity seems to be wired somehow to believe in a higher being. And like, we're not going into specifics if we're saying that do we believe in God? If you look at like through the ages, you've got various different cultures and different people groups, and whether it was Ra or Thor or the Mayans in some remote place who somehow decided to believe in a higher being, I think it's very difficult to go, well, there is no such thing as God, when people maybe from a confused point of view, or they don't really know how to express what God is, they came up with something or conjured something themselves. I don't believe people conjure things themselves. They've seen the evidence of God. I'm not saying that the Mayan God was God, the savior of the world, but how do people in such remote places, surely we're wired to believe that God exists. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No,
I'm getting my point of view across.
Sense,
but people have been so far removed in the world from the beginning of time, and they weren't even able to communicate, and yet believed in something that was beyond themselves. And I kind of look at it, and maybe it's a very simplistic point of view, but they say that where there's smoke, there's fire. And people have been talking about God forever. And surely there's fire there. There's a lot of smoke. So I struggle to take an atheist point of view that says, well, there is nothing. I mean, to me, that's just not thinking. Personally, and I'm probably going to offend a gazillion people now, but it's just, surely there's more.
I would agree with Mel even as far as to say, just look at celebrity culture in our modern day. You don't even have to go as far back as, those Mayan cultures. For me, even just the existence of a celebrity culture. How do you explain this sort of attitude of worship that we have. We're
Yeah.
always looking for something to
Totally.
admire, to praise. And I think that's a hard wiring of some sort.
Yeah.
So I would fully agree. We look for things to worship, as it were.
So when you take that argument, and
Yeah.
you say there's some degree of hardwiring, if we
Yeah.
can call it that,
Yeah.
and you add to that all the philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and you add to that everything that we see in nature. So, I mean, that's something that we haven't even really
Touched
delved
on, yeah.
into. The whole idea that the world is fine-tuned, even the fact that life itself exists. You add up all those things, I think it's very, very, like, you have to be almost disingenuous to say that there is not some evidence
Yeah.
for at least the idea of a higher being, a higher power, a supreme intelligence, or whatever the case may be. But
Yeah.
then when you look at Jesus
Yeah.
and you go and you look at what has happened in history, and I think it's important, Mel, what you just said about it, you know, the idea that you can just kind of write all that off as being lazy, because it is being lazy. I've spoken to many people who kind of go, yeah, the religion stuff, whatever, you know, that's just rubbish. I cannot go, gravity, well, that's just rubbish, right? That's lazy. I have to go and interrogate and think about these things and ask myself the questions and look at the evidence. And I think what often happens is people, they just write it off, but based on what they've heard in pop culture about religion, based on their misconceptions
Yeah.
around religion, just
Yes.
go and write it off. But when you add up all these things and then look at the person of Jesus and what happened in history, it becomes an almost inescapable reality.
Yeah.
I completely agree with everything that was said here.
Yeah.
But I want to ask a question on behalf of listeners.
Yeah.
Because I know many people are questioning this stuff. And if you look, human nature is that we wait until the last minute to give your life to Jesus or to even think about God and to pray and stuff. But just say, we've got a listener who's been like really ill, and then and the person has been healed. But they believe that it's coincidence. Like, it's not necessarily because God exists and because the healing came through Jesus, but because it was going to happen anyway on that day. And whether they prayed about it or not, they still would have received the healing, because people now are starting to think that God is in something that you've created in your mind.
Yeah.
Sort of it becomes a mind over matter
Yes,
kind of thing. Well, I know quite a few doctors, quite a few friends of mine are doctors, and in the medical fraternity, miracle healings happen. And doctors who are because they're scientists and confessing anything other than pure naturalism as a scientist is professional suicide. They kind of write it off as, yeah, it was a miracle healing, and that's kind of where it stops. But they don't allow themselves to actually question that, to delve into that. Like, there is no physical explanation. There's no scientific, rational explanation for what happened, which goes against my worldview. Therefore, just ignore it. And that kind of touches on the whole, and I think we've sort of spoken about it a little bit. When we get introduced to the person of Jesus, when we have an encounter with the person of Jesus, that's very much a special revelation of God in our lives. But for people, like you were saying, people who've never heard of Jesus, the Mayans and all of that, they had what they call, I think it's a general revelation of God, as in, the evidence for God is all around us.
Just back on the healing thing, I think personally I've come down on two sides of that. One is sometimes people bounce back from sickness. And it happens. Yeah, that happens. But on the flip side of that, I have also seen and encountered scenarios where clearly there was healing, like God did something significant in the life of an individual. And I think that it's important to mention that. Finally, I'm glad you brought that up, because there is also a degree to which belief in God, especially belief in Jesus, it moves beyond just a logical or an intellectual assent to the idea of God.
Yeah.
It becomes a personal experience
Yeah.
of God himself. And that's important to also mention. Yes, we could be sitting here making arguments for the existence of God all morning, but ultimately,
Yeah.
nothing trumps meeting God himself, like
Yeah.
experiencing
Totally.
God himself. And I think that's something that we around this table, I mean, Leon's questionable, but we around this table.
Leon person is. You should get him on the show.
What you're saying? Sorry, please.
No.
finish, 'cause now
I'm just
you-
saying it's there needs to also be a point where
Yeah.
Jesus becomes real to
Yeah,
me.
you need to have a personal
personally.
encounter.
It goes beyond just an idea.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
you're saying is pretty exciting, because I just had a thought now about, what Christ said to his disciples when he was about to leave the earth. He actually he never gave them the instruction to prove his existence. He just said, be my witnesses. So,
Yeah.
so it is actually
Yeah.
about that personal experience. I watched a conversation. There's a lady in the UK, she's a parliamentarian who suffered quite a personal, tragedy a few years ago. Her son was shot. And through the experience of grief and all of that, she actually encountered God, and God became real to her. And, she was on a panel and a very heated debate with a bunch of atheists and a bunch of other people who were, really trying to ridicule the existence of God. And one of the things she said quite confidently, I'll never forget how confident she was in the midst of that ridicule. But she said, look, I'm not here to even prove that God exists, but what I can tell you is that he is real to me, because I know for myself, and nobody can ever shake that. And for me,
That's awesome.
that really hit me.
But let me ask you this, and put this ball in your court.
Go ahead.
So I'm listening to all this, and
Yeah.
maybe over the course of time, I have started thinking about whether God exists, and I am convinced to a degree. What do I do now? Like, how do we are talking about God being real to us? How does God become real to me? How do I reach out to Him? What
Yeah.
does that look like in practice? How would you answer that?
Well, in a previous recording on this platform, we've talked about God's word, specifically the Bible, and whether it can be trusted or not. And I think it was Donnie Chang who made the comment that God isn't afraid of our questions. And so I think a lot of times people associate quote unquote organized religion with not questioning. But in fact, if we go into the Bible, God encourages us to. In fact, he's excited. I think Donnie Chang said God isn't intimidated by our questions. And I quite like that point, because even for me, who's sort of grew up in a Christian family, that was new to me. I'd never heard the expression of that kind of idea, that actually God welcomes our questions. So if anyone is listening, if you have questions and you're sort of kind of wavering, you're not sure, do I get into this thing or not? The first thing that I would really say to you is your questions are valid. Your questions don't disqualify you from a life of knowing God. Those questions are valid. And in fact, I would challenge you to go further. And I think it's in going further into the Bible and into conversations with other people who believe that these things will start to be unveiled to you. So for me, that's the first point. But coming back to the Bible itself, there are some very specific, as it were, guidelines that tell us how that journey with Christ and with God begins. First, we believe in our hearts and we confess with our mouth. We pray, we speak to Him, and we say, come. I've watched several videos, and I think all of us around the table will have watched when we did the Alpha course, for example, the hardened criminal who said, God, if you are real,
show
come
yourself.
into my life because I'm a mess, I would say that's the kind of thing we should be saying to God. If you are real, please show yourself, and take it from there.
I love that.
That is a challenge.
Well said.
That's a huge challenge, and I want to back that up. I want anybody who's out there who's listening to us, ask the question.
Yeah.
God is there. He is real. He's waiting for you. So ask the question.
Yeah.
Also, I would say, obviously, in a little discussion like this, we don't cover.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really.
Sure.
I don't even think you can call it scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So if some things come up for you, if you have a question, if you want someone to explain it to you, if you need a little bit more advice or guidance or whatever, write to us. Comment on this video or on this audio, whatever way you're consuming it. Send us a mail or something. Just go to Facebook. Facebook.com/ask1.
Facebook.com/ask1. But I think that if you're out there listening to us and you're actually serious about knowing whether God exists or not, ask him to reveal himself to you.
Yeah.
I don't think that he's going to let you down. His word says that he will never let you down.
Yeah.
If you ask, you will receive. And we've all done it. Everybody here around this table has done that.
And we've all gone through that process where we looked at all this and went, well, do I
Yes.
really believe this?
Yeah.
Is this worth believing? Is this real?
Yeah.
And we've all gone through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's very exciting. And if you do this, if you take the challenge, let us know how it goes. If nothing happens and you think it's all smoke and mirrors, let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've had this amazing revelation of God and Jesus, please let us know. We want to share that with everybody else that's listening. For me to explain or to prove that God exists to somebody who's never experienced him, I experience God in a very real way every single day. For me to explain that to somebody who never has and kind of give any kind of proof, it's the same as me saying that maybe none of you have ever met my dad. But I can tell you my dad exists because I have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that because then basically you're saying I'm delusional. So maybe that's a closing thought. Maybe that's some place to land this thing.
Nice.
Okay, cool. If you've listened to this show and it's really bothered you, something's crawled up your nose and you have to let somebody know, write to us on facebook.com/ask1. Or maybe this has revealed something to you and your life is completely different. Please, we want to know. Guys, any closing thoughts?
If something did crawl up your nose, maybe God is revealing himself to you already.
Or
Good
you should
point.
see a doctor.
That's wise. Or you should see a doctor, actually. I thought it, but I didn't say it as boldly as Mel did,
Very spiritual and very practical from Philemoni.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
We're a good balance.
We're a team.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
great.